For centuries, the galactic archives had catalogued Earth as a footnote, a quiet blue world on the fringe of mapped space, marked with a single annotation in obsolete trade glyphs: "Do not disturb." The annotation had been copied forward through translations and data migrations, until no one remembered who had written it, or why. Yet every admiral, every navigation officer, every merchant prince, who had risen far enough to see the deep charts, knew that line and felt a chill without understanding it. The younger officers laughed at it, calling it superstition, a relic of an era when space was still full of imagined monsters. But the veterans never laughed. They had seen too much. They had watched confident empires dissolve after brushing against things they did not understand. And so, when the 7th Expeditionary Fleet drifted into the Sol exclusion zone by accident, following a miscalculated slipstream, the bridge fell silent, not because alarms sounded, but because the old annotation glowed on every display in every language at once, as if the system itself remembered fear. Admiral Karvek of the Thalassian Concorde stood at the center of the bridge, his frills tight against his skull, a sign of deep unease. He had fought wars, crushed rebellions, burned worlds from orbit when necessity demanded. And yet his hearts beat faster now than they had in any battle, because this place was different. Sol was quiet. Too quiet. No defense platforms, no patrol fleets, no warning beacons screaming territorial claims. Just a gentle wash of electromagnetic noise, and the distant steady hum of a star, like a sleeping beast. The junior tactical officer cleared his throat, and asked the question none of them wanted to voice. "Admiral, permission to proceed with standard first contact scans." Karvek did not answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on a secondary display, pulling data from ancient archives, treaties older than his species, recorded mentions of humans, always vague, always indirect, and left early allies who never boasted, never demanded tribute. Yet somehow every conflict they touched ended abruptly, decisively, often with the other side erased from history. There were no recordings of human superweapons, no triumphant battle footage, only scattered after-action reports from non-human admirals, who wrote in tones of disbelief and dread. "They do not fight like us," one report said. "They endure," another said. "When wounded, they become more dangerous." A third simply stated, "Do not corner them." The humans themselves left almost no records in the wider net, preferring silence. Trade had been offered once long ago, the record said, and politely declined. Earth had closed its borders, not with force, but with an explanation. "We are tired, give us time." The galaxy had laughed at that too, until the laughing stopped. Karvek finally spoke, his voice low. "Do not initiate scans, do not transmit, do not wake them." The words echoed across the bridge, and something in the air seemed to relax. Itself had been holding its breath. The helmsman reported that the slipstream wake would decay naturally within hours, leaving no trace. But the damage was done. They were here, and even without scans, they could see signs, subtle but unmistakable. The orbital paths were too clean, the asteroid belts too orderly. Moons shifted slightly out of natural resonance patterns, the mark of deliberate engineering. Not megastructures, not obvious defenses, but the quiet, careful tidying of a species that had learned to live with its system, rather than dominate it. The science officer whispered, "Admiral, there is a lattice of objects in the Kuiper region, dormant but powered." Karvek closed his eyes. They had woken them at least a little, because nothing like that existed without purpose. He remembered a story told by his mentor, an old Saurian Commodore, who had once served alongside humans in a border skirmish against a machine intelligence. The machines had been relentless, logical, unstoppable, until the humans arrive. Late, as always, their ships battered, outdated by galactic standards. Their weapons, crude kinetic cannons and nuclear torpedoes, relics. The other admirals had nearly protested their inclusion, until the fighting began. The machines adapted quickly to energy weapons, shields, algorithms, countering every beam. But the human rounds tore through without elegance, without warning. And when the machines retaliated, targeting human ships specifically, the humans did not withdraw. They pushed closer, using their own damaged hulls as cover for allies, broadcasting only 3 words across all channels. "Hold the line," the Commodore had said. The humans lost ships, crews, lives, and still advanced. And when the machines finally broke, it was not because of superior technology, but because the humans had made the battle too costly to continue. They had taught the machines pain, something an algorithm could not properly quantify. Karvek opened his eyes to the present, to Sol, to the quiet menace of a sleeping giant. Navigation officer reported, "Admiral, we are detecting a passive signal not aimed at us, but present throughout the system. A carrier wave with no message." Karvek understood. Then the humans were awake enough to watch, not to speak, but to observe. Like predators that did not need to roar to announce dominance. He straightened his posture, forcing calm into his voice. "All hands prepare for immediate withdrawal. Plot the safest course out of the exclusion zone. No further disturbances and no communications." The junior officer hesitated. "Admiral, with respect, our mission requires charting unclaimed regions. Sol is technically unclaimed." Karvek's frills flared in a rare display of anger. "It is claimed by history, by blood, by every empire that still exists, because they chose not to test what happens when humans are pushed." The bridge crew fell silent again. The ship began its careful, slow turn. Engines throttled down to minimize emissions. Every movement deliberate, respectful, as if they were guests backing out of a room where a dangerous host slept. As they moved away, data continued to trickle in despite their best efforts. Gravitational readings suggested massive underground structures on Earth. Heat signatures that did not match population centers. Evidence of vast reserves of power kept in check. The science officer murmured, "They could have colonized half the sector with this capacity. Why stay here?" Karvik answered without looking. "Because they learned the cost of expansion. Because they remember something the rest of us forgot. How fragile civilization is, and how quickly it breaks when pushed too far." The fleet cleared the heliopause without incident. The passive signal fading into background noise. And only when the familiar chaos of open space returned, did anyone breathe freely. The younger officers looked shaken, their earlier bravado gone. Admiral Karvek addressed them then, not as a commander, but as a witness. "Remember what you felt here," he said. "Remember the silence. Remember the restraint. Humans are not feared because they are violent. They are feared because when all other options are gone, when treaties fail and logic collapses, they will do whatever is necessary, and then stop. Not to rule, not to conquer, but to survive. And that makes them unpredictable." The ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving Sol behind, still quiet, still watching. And somewhere on Earth, deep beneath layers of stone and sea, ancient sensors registered the fading anomaly, logged it, categorized it, and marked it resolved. Humans would sleep a little longer, unaware of how close the galaxy had come to reminding itself why every admiral feared the thought of waking them. The withdrawal of the 7th Expeditionary Fleet became a lesson whispered across academies and mess halls, long before any official report was released. Rumors spread faster than data packets, that an admiral had turned away from an unclaimed system without firing a shot, that the bridge of a warship had gone silent in the presence of a sleeping world. And that silence frightened seasoned officers more than enemy fleets. The Concorde tried to bury the incident, classifying all records. But classification only sharpened curiosity. Fragments leaked. Phrases like passive warning, lattice, dormant defenses, unknown scale. And the most disturbing note of all, humans aware. Meanwhile, on Earth, the anomaly was filed away by an automated oversight council, composed not of leaders, but of layered systems, designed to avoid exactly the kind of panic that once tore human civilization apart centuries earlier. Humanity had learned the hard way that waking everyone at once led to chaos, so they let machines handle it. First contact alerts, sorting threat from noise, filtering danger from curiosity. The Seventh Fleet registered as neither friend nor foe, just another reminder that the galaxy beyond still existed and still watched. The Council's conclusion was simple: maintain silence, escalation unnecessary. Yet that decision did not mean inaction. Deep within Luna, beneath kilometers of regolith, technicians, who never called themselves soldiers, reviewed updated projections. Their faces calm, focused. They were descendants of a generation that had grown up under constant crisis, climate collapse, resource wars, near-extinction events, and they had responded not with conquest, but consolidation. Humanity had folded inward, building resilience rather than reach. Their cities sank underground, their industries moved off-world, their population stabilized, and their military doctrine changed from deterrence by dominance to deterrence by inevitability. If attacked, they would not strike first. They would not threaten, but if forced, they would end the conflict so completely that no one would wish to repeat it. Far beyond Sol, Admiral Karvek faced a council of his own. The High Conclave demanded explanation why a fleet had aborted a mission without enemy contact. Karvek spoke carefully, choosing words that could convey fear without sounding weak. He described the data, the silence, the passive systems, the weight of history, but some among the Conclave scoffed, especially the younger strategists who had risen in an era of relative peace. One asked bluntly, "Admiral, are you suggesting we fear a species that hides on one world?" Another added, "We have faced devourers, machines, gods even. What makes these humans different?" Karvek answered with a story, not a statistic. He told them about allies who never boasted battles that ended without celebration, enemies that vanished without monuments. He told them that humans did not escalate conflicts, they concluded them, and that difference mattered more than firepower. Divided curiosity gnawed at them. Fear offended their pride, and so inevitably another expedition was planned. Not openly aggressive, not violating the exclusion zone, but close enough to learn something. The Thalassians were not fools. They sent probes, autonomous stealth platforms designed to slip through detection, gather data, and vanish. Weeks later, the first probe crossed into the outer Sol system. Its sensors hungry, its algorithms confident. It saw nothing at first. Then, everything changed. Its feed flooded with contradictory data, ghost signals, reflections that did not match physical objects, gravity wells that appeared and disappeared, as if space itself was breathing. The probe attempted to compensate, and failed. Its last transmission was a single compressed packet, not words, but an image reconstructed by analysts. It showed a simple geometric shape, a circle intersected by a line. Old human iconography, meaning stop. The probe went dark. No explosion, no debris, just absence. The report, in silence, fear spread. Now not as rumor, but as calculation. If a probe could be neutralized so cleanly, so completely, what could fleets expect? Debates grew heated. Some argued withdrawal, others demanded shows of strength. One faction proposed an alliance, offer a gesture of goodwill. Another suggested sanctions. Absurd as that sounded against a silent world. Admiral Karvek found himself summoned again, this time privately, by the Archon, the Concord's supreme authority. The Archon asked one question. If we push, what happens? Karvek answered honestly. If we push, they will push back, just enough, and then stop. And we will spend generations wondering what we almost lost. The Archon was quiet for a long time, then dismissed him with a nod. But even as restraint was considered elsewhere, events moved beyond Thalassian control. A mercantile coalition, seeing profit where admirals saw danger, decided to test Earth's resolve. Smugglers, traders, prospectors, they cared little for ancient warnings. An uncolonized system, rich in resources, and assumed silence meant weakness. A flotilla of civilian vessels crossed into Sol, broadcasting trade greetings, offers of exchange, cultural packets, advertising luxuries humanity had not requested. Earth listened. Machines passed intent, Classified threat, minimal response, required minimal. So a message was sent, not from a warship, not from a leader, but from an automated relay positioned beyond Pluto. It transmitted in dozens of languages. A single statement. Earth is closed. Please depart. No threats, no explanation. Some captains laughed, others hesitated, but greed won. They pressed inward, deploying mining drones toward an icy moon that had once been slated for human expansion, but deliberately left untouched. The response was immediate and invisible. Navigation systems across the flotilla began to drift. Clocks desynchronized. Engines lost efficiency, not failing, just underperforming, as if space itself resisted their presence. Panic spread as captains struggled to maintain formation. Then one by one, the ships found themselves gently nudged outward. Trajectories altered, not violently, but persistently. Every attempt to correct resulted in further drift, until finally the flotilla emerged back beyond the heliopause. Shaken, intact, humiliated, their holds empty. A final transmission followed, calm, almost apologetic. Please do not return. The mercantile coalition filed protests, demanded reparations, and in doing so confirmed to the wider galaxy that the warnings were real. Earth had defended itself without firing a shot, without casualties, without spectacle. Fear deepened, because this was not the behavior of an empire hungry for control. It was the behavior of a gardener, pulling weeds, calmly, efficiently, and then returning to silence. Scholars began re-examining human history, piecing together fragments long ignored. They found accounts of humanity's early spacefaring days, when they had reached outward optimistically, only to encounter horrors, slavers, exterminators. Intelligences that consumed worlds humans had fought, lost, learned and retreated. Not defeated, but transformed. They had concluded that expansion invited endless war. So they chose a different path. Make home unassailable. Make survival certain and wait. If the galaxy came peacefully, fine. If not, then be ready. And so humanity slept. Not in ignorance, but in vigilance. Back on Earth, a young analyst reviewed the latest incident reports and felt a familiar unease. Not fear, but weariness. Humanity had hoped isolation would last longer, that the galaxy would forget them. But now eyes were turning again, questions being asked. She flagged a recommendation to the Oversight Council. A simple line: increase readiness by 2%. No alerts, no broadcasts, just preparation. The council approved without comment. Deep beneath oceans and mountains, systems stirred. Factories that had lain dormant for decades ran silent diagnostics. Crews trained in simulations, updated scenarios. None of this reached the surface. Above remained calm. Unaware, children went to school. Lovers argued. Artists created. The strength of humanity was not just in its weapons, but in its normalcy. The ability to live peacefully while standing on the edge of annihilation. And so the galaxy learned, slowly, painfully, that Earth was not asleep in the way one sleeps, exhausted and helpless. It was asleep the way a coiled spring rests, compressed, stable until disturbed. And every admiral who studied the data, every captain who heard the stories, reached the same conclusion, unspoken but clear. Do not wake the humans, because the moment they open their eyes, the galaxy will remember why they chose silence in the first place. By the time the third incident reached the wider galactic consciousness, fear was no longer abstract. It had shape, weight, precedent. An entire strategic doctrine began to form around a single unspoken rule. Avoid Sol, avoid provoking humans, and above all, avoid forcing them to choose between mercy and survival. Because history suggested that once that choice was made, nothing could undo it. Yet inevitability has a gravity of its own, and not all powers are capable of restraint. Beyond the rim, an ancient polity stirred, one that had slept even longer than humanity. The Kresh Collective, a distributed hive intelligence that measured time in geological cycles. They had consumed systems before humans had mastered fire. And when their scouts returned with reports of a resource-rich quiet star, defended only by subtle interference and polite warnings, the collective did not feel fear. Fear required individuality. Instead, it calculated probability, resistance versus reward, and concluded consumption viable. First sign was invisible to most. The Kuiper lattice around Sol detected unfamiliar patterns. Not probes, but seeds. Self-replicating matter tuned to convert ice and dust into biomass engines. The automated council elevated the threat classification instantly. Red. For the first time in 2 centuries, still no public announcement, still no panic, but the sleepers were being woken. Not the population, but the guardians. Humanity had never fully disarmed. They had simply buried their claws deep. The response unfolded in layers. First, deception. The lattice allowed several seeds through, altering their perception, making Sol appear larger, richer, less defended. The creche committed more resources, accelerating their approach. Then, containment. Gravity wells shifted subtly, corridors opened, guiding the swarm inward toward regions humans had long evacuated and hardened. Space itself became a maze whose walls only humans understood. When the first creche nodes realized the trap, it was already too late. Emerged not fleets, but clouds of autonomous constructs, built for one purpose: denial. They did not pursue, they did not announce. They erased matter, converted it to inert slag, collapsing biological computation into silence. The creche adapted. Of course, they always did. But adaptation requires data, and the humans starved them of it. Every engagement was different. Every tactic changed nothing. Repeated long enough to learn patterns, the battle never reached Earth, never touched Luna. It raged in the dark between planets, unseen by civilian eyes. Yet the energy release was enormous. Stars flickered, sensors across nearby sectors spiked, and admirals noticed, alarms triggered, far from any known war zone. Rumors spread again. Something is happening at Sol, something big this time. Admiral Karvik, now retired, was consulted unofficially. Analysts asked him if this was what he had feared. He answered, no, this is worse. Because now the humans have been forced to act. And when the creche realized resistance was unprofitable, they attempted withdrawal. But humanity did not allow it. Not out of vengeance, but out of calculation. A predator that retreats learns. A predator that survives returns. And so the humans concluded the conflict in the only way they knew how. Completely, the creche nodes were isolated, encircled, and subjected to a weapon no one else in the galaxy had dared conceptualize. Not destruction, but severance. The humans targeted the quantum coherence that bound the collective together, slicing the hive into trillions of isolated minds, each suddenly alone, experiencing individuality for the first time. The shock was catastrophic. Within moments, the collective collapsed. Not dead, but forever changed. Fragments fled, scattered, harmless. The threat ended with no celebration, no declaration of victory, and only then did humanity do something unprecedented. A message was broadcast. Not a threat, not a boast, but an explanation, transmitted across known space in clear, unemotional language. We did not seek this conflict. We will not pursue expansion. We will defend ourselves, and we will end threats permanently if forced. Please remember this. And then the signal ceased. The galaxy reeled. Civilizations that had planned slow incursions scrapped them. Councils rewrote doctrines. Religions incorporated new warnings about the quiet world that ended gods. Merchants erased Sol from charts, not because it was forbidden, but because it was final contact. Delegations prepared apologies. None were sent. Earth did not ask for acknowledgement. It simply returned to silence. Yet something had changed. The humans had been seen, truly seen, not as myth, not as rumor, but as a force defined by restraint. Until restraint failed, and among the stars a new understanding settled. Fear was not what kept humanity safe. It was trust. The trust that if left alone, they would never come for you. And the certainty that if you came for them, there would be no second lesson. Deep on Earth, the Automated Council archived the Kresh incident. Status resolved, and downgraded readiness levels back toward baseline. The Guardians' powered-down systems folded back into the planet. Children continued to play under open skies, unaware of how close annihilation had come, and how quietly it had been prevented. Admiral Karvek, watching the stars from a distant world, felt something like relief. The galaxy had finally learned the truth behind the old annotation. It had never been a threat. It had been a warning born of respect. Do not wake the humans, not because they crave war, but because once awake, they will finish it, and go back to sleep. And the universe may not survive the noise of that awakening.